We'll see if we're getting audio here to everyone. Please feel free to introduce yourself. All right, so for those people kind of watching it live again, what we'll do is kind of feel free to kind of ask questions. We'll go over some Cubase 8.5 items. And we also have some questions that have come in. If you have questions, please feel free to kind of show them you can enter the field in the comments field. You can enter some questions. So we had some questions that were sent in advance. Also, make sure you guys can hear me okay. We'll just kind of check the audio levels. All right. Welcome, James from Fairfield, California. All right, and if someone, we've been very fortunate for people in the past that have actually kind of kept like a minutes of the session and uploaded that for different topics that have been covered. So if someone wants to do that, that would be a great addition. And once again, we'll get started here in a couple minutes. All right. Hey, Rick, good to see you online. And Pete from Portland, Maine. I got to travel up there once. It's a beautiful city. Carl, good to see you back. All right, so once again, if you have topics, we'll kind of spend some time going over some of the new functions in Cubase 8.5, Cubase Pro 8.5. There's a lot of great new things. This came out just in early December. We did kind of a hangout on the Steinberg YouTube channel for December, but we'll go over some of the stuff this month. And again, if you have topics that you want to be covered, we had some people that had sent some stuff in advance, and we'll go over those topics. Okay, I'll see if I get the volume up a little louder here. See if this, see if this volume is, I'll just kind of adjust my volume here on my mixer, see if this is getting out to you a little better. So we'll just kind of check this. All right, so we see Jason from Montreal. I'm going to turn my volume down on my computer. All right, so we see Jason from Montreal. I think the audio might be a little better if you guys want to comment on that. Okay. Hey, Jay, Happy New Year. Good to see you online here. All right, so once again, if we'll be kind of going over some of the new Cubase Pro 8.5 features. We'll spend some time on that. All right, good to see Frank from Berlin. That's great. It's pretty late in Berlin, so... and once again, if you have particular topics that you want to cover, we'll probably spend maybe about 30-40 minutes on some Cubase Pro 8.5. Since we haven't really done it in this form yet. All right, so good to see Sir Robert there. And we'll go over some questions first that we had. So one of the questions before we get started was on, is it safe to go to El Capitan, the latest Mac OS? So right before Christmas, Steinberg released some updates. So the latest versions are all working great with El Capitan for Cubase and Nuendo. All right, great to see Someone, Black Farah Music from Brazil. All right. So we have a couple of questions maybe we'll do before, some quick questions. All right, so we're seeing a question on expressions. All right, I'm just going to keep some notes here. All right, and we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Is the audio levels better for everyone now? Thanks for the Happy New Year wish, Dennis. Hope everyone had a great holiday season. Okay, glad the levels are better, all right. Okay, we'll wait just about another minute and get started. All right. And once again, if someone wants to kind of keep notes of different topics that we go over, that like a little index that we can post for the Hangout, so if people have particular questions, they could jump to a specific time. That's always really appreciated. And once again, if you have questions as we're going through the different topics, feel free to ask as well. So we'll try to keep all the different. We'll try to keep an eye on questions that are coming in real time. Okay, maybe just another 30 seconds, get some more people logging in. Okay, let's see if we have some more. All right, so thanks for the New Year's wish from the United Kingdom. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So one of the things that would just happened in December, and it's kind of getting to be nearly clockwork with some of the Steinberg releases, is the latest version of 8 came out and was 8.5. Okay, so I'm just seeing a couple questions coming in. I'm going to copy these down and keep them in my notes. Just give me 1 second. Maybe we'll go through a couple of the quick questions first and then get into some 8.5. All right, just doing some housekeeping here. All right, so we see Chris from LA. All right, so Maurice, I believe you're in Reading, so I have family in Reading, so always enjoy going there. All right, so let's go ahead and take a quick look at, we'll go through some of the quick questions that have come in. We had a question regarding libraries and what is a library file. So one of the things that we see with kind of your media management is when you go to your MediaBay, you can see you can see kind of all of your audio files that are on your particular system. So if you wanted to look for any relevant audio file or MIDI file, samples, presets. You could do this with MediaBay. And that's not going to be based on the project. When we go to a particular project and you start to record and you define a record folder, all of your audio is going to be placed directly into your pool. So let me just open up a project here that has a little more audio on it. So the pool will be a reference to all of the audio files that are in that particular project. So when you go to open up our pool window, when you define your location, your audio files folder for your project, this is where all the files that are recorded directly into that project are saved to. Now, there's another concept called libraries, and we could import, we see these library files, and we could export libraries. And one of the things that we wanted to be able to do with the library file is to, a lot of times we have, let's say, like different news organizations or like a lot of post-production facilities will actually need to have a collection of files. Maybe it's a tag for ESPN radio or for National Public Radio, which both use Steinberg products. And what they need to do is to have kind of a folder, or basically an audio pool that is separate and independent from the actual files, or independent from the actual project. So when you have a library file, what you could actually do is, once you have this open, I think you could just go to I thought it was under here, but the library file will allow you to just simply store all of the audio files that are independent. So if you always need to have like a dun 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 kind of tag or something like that, an audio tag that you use repeatedly, you could store those within a library folder and not have to worry about having to open up a particular project or search throughout the entire MediaBay. So it's kind of a collection of, you could often, people use it for commonly used audio files for different tags and stuff like that. So that's stored independently of the actual project itself. So let's take a look at some other quick questions that have come in. All right. One question we had asked was, when people are working with different drum loops, they noticed that when they would take a drum loop into a project, let's say, and let's say if they drag that into the project, the audio level of the fader sometimes wasn't always based at 0 dB. And this could be based on the preview volume. So if I wanted to drag a file from one folder in, as soon as I select that folder, because I had my preview volume set lower, the preview volume would actually kind of set the volume level for that track when you drag it in. So that was a question that we had asked, someone just wanting it to default to be 0 dB. But now as you kind of drag in full files from your MediaBay and you notice that the volume level isn't set at Unity at 0 dB, you could just simply come right here and you could adjust your preview volume. And the reason why this is, and may seem kind of an odd thing, but a lot of people may be auditioning different loops and audio files in context with the mix. So if you adjust your preview volume here, you could just drag that over and that level will automatically be carried over directly into the fader for the particular file. So just a quick handy thing there. All right, let me go to some of the other questions that had come in. All right, so we had a question on what's the most efficient way to use a separate MIDI track to record expressions for another instrument track when the MIDI notes performances has already been recorded, then merge them together. One of the things that could be a little odd is, it's really, for some reason, you're not really able to record the expression maps after the fact. So if we do have kind of a MIDI track, and one, we'll just kind of show you a nifty little trick that a lot of people miss. So if I come here and let's say if I have a couple of MIDI events, and let's just say I'll just set my range here. Now, one handy preset that a lot of people don't know, if you want to set the left and right locators around a selected range, is you could just hit the letter P, and that's a very handy shortcut to know. So if I wanted to come here and let's say, okay, I just wanted to kind of split this, and let's say if I have several different tracks of MIDI data, then you want to kind of easily merge. Now, sometimes there are some different recording options. Let's say if I have some low notes here, and maybe on this particular event, I have a series of high notes. Let me just erase some of my lower notes that I accidentally drew in. And let's say if we have different articulations here, or dynamics, and a lot of times when people just kind of copy the parts over, there's actually kind of two different events here. So if I double click, I don't see kind of the bottom layer, and we see this little pattern here indicating that it's actually kind of merged. So if we grab the glue gun, and I think it's I may get my modifier key wrong, I'll try it with Alt or Option key. So now clicking with the glue gun on Alt or Option will allow you to see kind of both parts, and that will merge them together efficiently. So I think that's going to be the best way of taking expression note data that was perhaps recorded on a separate track and incorporating it in, is just kind of dragging it and then merging the two events. So that's going to be kind of the fastest way. I know it's probably not the ideal method for accomplishing that task, but it will kind of work pretty efficiently. So again, just hold down the Alt or Option key when the MIDI parts are over top of each other, and then you'll be able to merge those parts very efficiently. All right, so let me just take a look at some of the other notes that have come in. Okay, so we had a question that was asked just on our in the questions field. It says, I'm trying to understand MIDI with 16 out third-party plugins like Machine. I know you may not have Machine, but can you demonstrate a third-party plugin has the same type of functionality? So I guess this would be for 16 outs in the mixer, or if it's going to be, maybe if you could clarify in the comments, if it's for the mixer or for the audio. So let's go ahead and load up I'll just start a new project. Keith Lewis, good to see you online here. All right. So I'll just start an empty project, and we'll load up a instrument that has 16 stereo outputs as well as 16 MIDI channels as well. So if I wanted to come here, you just say, okay, I wanted to go to my Halion Sonic SE, and let me just go ahead and drag over a particular file. So let's say if I'm here, I can now just kind of look at my instrument by clicking on the little instrument icon here. Now, once you kind of see your rack instrument, if you, from the rack itself, now it used to be that there is a difference between track instruments and instrument racks. So you could have an instrument track or a MIDI track routed to an instrument in the rack. So it could be a little confusing. And the original intention was that the audio, that MIDI information going to a rack, that instrument could have multiple outputs, as well as into the mixer. So you have, like, like in this instance, or the example used, machine 16 stereo outputs. But it could also be multi-timbral as well. Then I think around Cubase 4, they created something called the instrument track, and they wanted to be very simple from people migrating from other programs, where it was a stereo out and you would load up one particular instrument, and it wasn't multi-timbral. So it could be kind of, and depending on the instrument, that was fine. So if you had an instrument that was just playing back like a Fender Rhodes, you may not need to have 16 stereo outputs and multi-timbral capability. But in something kind of like a workstation type of instrument, that might be more applicable. So sometimes people would kind of go into one way and get a little stuck. And I believe it was Cubase 7.5, they introduced kind of, or maybe 6.5, the ability to kind of have a way, I think it was 7.5, if memory serves, that it used to be if you started with an instrument track, just by saying, okay, I want to add an instrument track here, and then if you wanted to add additional sounds within that instrument or additional outputs, that you're kind of limited and you couldn't really do anything. So if I start with a rack instrument, or if we start with a instrument in an instrument track, we can now activate all of your outputs. So you could click here within the instrument rack directly here. So you can say, okay, I want to activate all of my outputs. So you can just simply now say you want to have all 16 outputs, or you could just kind of turn off and on different outputs here as you see fit. So now what something was in the instrument rack previously was limited to a stereo output, you can now activate your multi outputs, and you could do that directly from the instrument rack itself, or if you come directly here, you could now just click here, and then you could just say, okay, you want it to have the different outputs show up directly here. Let me find the right spot. So you could also do it from the inspector. But now if I wanted to add more MIDI channels that were going directly to this instrument, so if I click, is it, just blanking on where the little click is here, sorry. So if I wanted to add more MIDI tracks, I can now just add MIDI tracks here. And since I have this selected, I can now just add my different MIDI tracks, and this will automatically assign these particular instruments to this instrument that was originally started in the VST instrument rack. And as you select the channel here, you could actually see kind of all of your, you could actually select that particular channel in the instrument. So if you have a multi-timbral instrument here, say, okay, I want this instrument, and I wanted to have a different instrument loaded up here, you can now just simply select these, and that would make it kind of the active instrument. So those are some of the really handy things. So here you could have 16-part multi-timbrality, or with your actual instrument track, you could just say, okay, I wanted this to have all of my outputs. So, all right. So I think that went over that. So we have a question from Keith: how to change the name of a marker track to say marker instead of MIDI. All right. All right, so let's see, and we also have a question that's probably related to this. From Dennis Woods, is there any reason to use instrument tracks now if I use instrument tracks and haven't come up with a limitation? It's not really, yeah, there's, to me, I always favored the instrument rack because I'd rather have like one instance of Hallion with 64 instruments within Hallion, just for kind of keeping, so I don't have to have 64 different virtual instruments loaded in. But it depends really kind of on the instrument to me. So sometimes, with the instrument rack, you have a little more flexibility. You could take that MIDI and copy it very easily to, change it to other instruments, where sometimes it could be a little more fixed. But the instrument track can be a little quicker for people, and some people coming from other programs have that only worked that way, that didn't allow you to have multi-timbral instruments. We're confused over kind of the flexibility, so we kind of mimicked some of the behavior, but we didn't want to get rid of the existing working methodology. So all right, so we had a question from Keith Lewis about how to change the name of a marker track to say marker instead of MIDI. Okay, I haven't run into this, but let me just add a marker track here and see if I get the same behavior they're getting. So once I have my markers, and it looks like we could just kind of label it however you want. It's my great marker track name. So it looks like it'll just kind of stay markers there. And let's say if I think if we can draw in some markers at this point. What Keith is saying, change the name of the marker track, say marker instead of MIDI. So are you starting off with an actual marker track here? Because it looks like it's keeping the name of the marker track. Okay, so, and one thing, and Keith had asked too if we could separate the window. Okay, and this is a really handy thing that a lot of people may not know, is the divide track list feature. This little icon right here. So if we enable this, we can now actually just kind of scroll up and down. So let's say if I added a number of audio tracks here, and we can now kind of scroll up and down and have particular tracks always kind of maintained in the top position here. But it looks like as soon as I separate the window, and let me just kind of take another track here, but it looks like the name markers is always kind of maintained here. So I'm not sure if you're seeing something differently, Keith. But it looks like that's kind of maintained directly here as well. So I make sure I'm kind of following you correctly. But it looks like the markers are kind of keeping the name there. So, but if you see something different in your system, just kind of enter it in the comments field, and we can go from there. All right, so let me just cycle back, see if I didn't miss any questions. All right. All right, so let's let me go through some topics that we had. One of the questions we had, someone had emailed and said they liked a particular feature of our program where they could kind of bring out the levels of different tracks, during a mix process. So let's say if I come here and I'm just going to switch to a different project here. So let's say I'll open up this project. All right, so let's say we have this project and I wanted to, I go to my mix window, and we're probably familiar with kind of the mix console window here. We'll make it a little more spread out by hitting the G and H keys just like we do. So let's say if I wanted to come here to my bass track. So a lot of us are kind of used to the concept of if we solo a track or a muted track, that all the other tracks will get muted, and that's a pretty typical workflow. But sometimes you may want to have something that was a little more set up to do. I'll just kind of slide this over just a little bit here. So with our bass, and you also see this little L button, and this kind of ties directly into the control room window. So if I go to my control room, and the control room is activated, and this could be done with our VST connections here. So when we go to our control room, we want to make sure that you have your outputs kind of defined but not connected, otherwise you could get double bust. And we have our studio tab here. So let's say I have these going out of my Yamaha monitors. Now we could have this thing called the listen bus, and often, like when you're previewing different tracks, this will actually get kind of processed through the listen bus. So if I come here, we could actually kind of set a different amount of dim, and we do this in our control room. So I can set this up to like minus 18 or so dB right here. So I just kind of do this in my main monitor. So as opposed to soloing a track, I can now hit the listen bus, and the other tracks will just kind of dim down by this amount. So I could still hear it in context. So again, we can mute the track, solo it, which mutes everything else, or kind of solo it and hear the other tracks kind of dimmed down. So that's a really kind of handy mixing feature if you want to just kind of hear something kind of a little more in context with your actual mix. That's really handy with that. So the listen bus, very, very powerful concept. We just had a question come in from, I believe it's Alan Nelson, about how do you organize your plugins, make new plugin folders, and so on. And this is one of the features that came with Cubase Pro 8. So, and you have one of the windows that we've seen in previous versions was kind of this plugin manager, or plugin information. And here you could actually just kind of, have all of your different, program plugins or third-party plugins, and you could see these all labeled here. Now, one of the things that was added in Cubase Pro 8 was this plugin manager, and this is really handy because what you could do is actually kind of see all of your available plugins here. And if you needed to set kind of your VST 2.x plugin paths, if you click on the little settings wheel here. And so when you do this, we can now just simply have access to like your different plugin settings here. Now, let's say if I wanted to create, now I can see my default would show me kind of my current plugin windows listed right here. So as we come here, we could actually create what's called a collection. So if we click on the plus sign, we could actually just say, okay, I wanted to create an empty collection, and let's say I want to use this for vocals. So we'll call it vocals. And now I have kind of a blank slate. So I say, okay, I like this plugin. I'll just randomly select a couple of plugins here. And say, okay, these are my favorite plugins for vocals. Now we could also create a new folder. So we could say like these are dynamics in our vocals. And then if you wanted to take these particular folders, plugins there, you could store them in dynamics and say, okay, I want it to have these for like different pitch shifting or whatever type of plugin. So now when you come here, you could just have like drum plugins, your favorite plugins, your default, or your vocal plugins, and you could see these kind of all organized exactly. And this works the same way for third-party plugins as well. So when I go to instantiate a plugin, I can now click here. And let's say if we go to an insert, depending on what the active collection is here, I can say, okay, here's my vocal folder, or I want to go to my favorites or to my drums. And now this is a very easy way to just come directly here and have access, and you can organize kind of all your plugins exactly how you want to see. And it's also really handy sometimes. In the US, we have a lot of like Black Friday plugin sales, like the day after Thanksgiving, where you get like 50 plugins for $50, and you may use 3 of the 50 plugins. So what this is going to allow you to do is to actually easily filter out all the plugins unnecessarily that you don't want to see. So, all right. So we had a question from Dennis about new library. So if I wanted to come here, and we discussed this a little earlier, so we can go to our pool window. At this point, you could set aside kind of a collection of audio files that will be kind of your favorite, like a separate plugin. So if you're working with, we see this a lot with radio station edits for different kind of like audio tags and stuff like that, or like days, we see it for TV stations where they're like, coming next week, coming tomorrow, coming tonight, in 2 days, in 4 days, where they have kind of one standard audio file. At that point, you could store those files kind of as a library of known audio files that you could just simply import and export and have access to. All right. So we've got some more people joining. All right. Okay, so let's go through. Let's see if there's any other kind of quick questions that have come in. But I think for Alan, does that make sense for your plugin folder? I think. All right. So I see Elite Beats. Good to see you again. We started about a half hour ago. We started at 7:40. We gave about at 7 p.m. Eastern time, U.S., but we started just about a half hour ago. All right. Let me just kind of cycle back through some of the other questions real quick. And if you have questions as we're going, please just kind of enter them in the comments field, and we'll try to circle back periodically. All right, so let me just go back to my notes of questions. All right, so here's a question that I get periodically, and people think that I'm kind of cheating the system, where when I right mouse click, I have all these kind of a larger toolbox as well as kind of my context sensitive menu options. And a lot of people, when they right click, by default have a small toolbox like this. You could actually toggle this behavior by holding down the control key. So if you wanted to toggle, you could hold down a control key to go back and forth. Now there's also a really nifty little preference for this. So if you wanted to come to your preferences and go to under editing tools, there's a little thing called pop-up toolbox on right click. So if that's checked, I get kind of the abbreviated toolbox. And if that's unchecked, so if I go to my preferences and choose to, again under editing, tools, and we'll uncheck pop-up toolbox on right click, you now kind of get the extended. And I like this especially for doing when you're working with multiple monitors, especially. So if you don't want to always go back to your primary monitor to access menus, a lot of the context sensitive menus will be available right here. So again, but you could toggle that behavior just by hitting the control key as you right click to toggle the behavior just like that. So, but some people felt that I had a secret option in my program and they didn't have that. So, but that's the preference you need to do. So, all right. So we had a quick question on what's Club Cubase, just info and Q&A. Yeah. So the channel is kind of dedicated for kind of so people could get the most out of their Steinberg products. And we do monthly a live session like this where people can ask questions in real time. But there's a number of videos. There's, probably 10 hours of tutorial videos in addition to about every month, 2 hours of kind of live sessions. So people could get the most out of their Steinberg systems. So. All right, let me just take a quick cycle back to my notes. All right, so we had a question regarding MIDI files. And it was about how can you set up imported MIDI files through menus is drag and drop. They'll import the file names to the generated events. So sometimes MIDI files can be a little tricky because a lot of MIDI files don't actually, depending on where the MIDI file is being created from, because it could be like a hardware sequencer where perhaps there's no track names. So depending on where the MIDI file is coming from, what information is within the MIDI file, they're going to have, so some MIDI files may not contain all of that data. It may just basically be notes. Now, just for reference, there's two different types of MIDI files. So you're going to have a type 0 MIDI file and a type 1 MIDI file. And a lot of times people assume that a standard MIDI file would automatically be kind of general MIDI compliant, meaning that it would kind of automatically work with different general MIDI or the extensions of GS or XG from different companies, and kind of all the program changes would work. So most commercial MIDI files are kind of set up like that. But it's not necessarily a standard MIDI file doesn't necessarily have to be compliant to the general MIDI specification. But when you go to import and export MIDI files, you could actually have a number of different preferences. So when you come here, you could actually just say, so when we go to your MIDI file preferences, so we go to preferences under MIDI to MIDI. So you could have different options. So if you wanted to export automation or different insert sends or what you want to import, so you can extract like patch changes. Often people export a standard MIDI file and have program changes that don't make any sense on someone else's playback system. So you could just say, okay, I don't want to extract the first program change or patch. But I may want to have the volume and panning because that's going to be consistent. You could, import controllers. There's a number of different options there. So, but once again, and with the two standard MIDI file types, the type 0 and type 1, the big difference is type 0 MIDI files, ironically, come all in one track, and then you need to separate. And that's often kind of outputted more by kind of like keyboard workstations, most kind of hardware-based systems. A type 1 MIDI file would have all the MIDI information spread across different tracks. So if you get a type 0 MIDI file and you get to the point where you need to actually kind of split it up, you could just choose to dissolve part, and then you could just say you want to separate MIDI channels. And again, this is from the MIDI menu. Choose dissolve part, and you have these different options here, and you could optimize the display. So if you have 60 measures of no data, that it won't actually have 60 measures of blank parts right there. So all right, so but again, not all MIDI files are created equally. So if you're getting MIDI files from someone, there's a chance that maybe they didn't name the files, or it's coming from hardware. So you might just have to, depending on where you're getting the MIDI file from, you may have to do a little bit of housekeeping on your end. All right, so we're seeing a question. Yeah, so I think you see Elite Beats about kind of the channels. I think there's almost 100 videos now that you can watch. So there's a lot of hours you can go through. All right, so we had a question on how do I back up my custom settings like preferences and plugin folders, colors, etc. So we see, and one thing you can do is kind of a template would allow you to do that, but not necessarily easily translate it. And then if you go to your application data folder or into your application settings folder on your Mac, you could do that. But one of the things, and I see from Cubase experts, you kind of take your user, your library, your preferences, Cubase, and that will work. But one of the things that you can do now, which is a new feature within Cubase Pro 8.5, and I was at Hans Zimmer's studio last month, and we're kind of showing staff some of the cool new features in 8.5. But one of the things that you could do now in 8.5 is have a profile manager, because a lot of times we find that people are like working with fairly highly configured system of like their key commands, and these are my favorite colors, and I want to have, these are my preferences, like I want the large toolbox to show up, or I want the small one. So there's a number of different settings that kind of makes each Cubase user's experience unique to them. And people would kind of back up their preferences and stuff like that. And there's a number of different files. So, but one of the things that we've added in the Cubase Pro 8.5 is this thing called a profile manager. So once you have this set up, you could actually create your own profile, and you could just name it. So if you say, okay, I want to make a new profile, and we'll say this is Greg Studio. At this point, I could email my profile or take it on a USB thumb drive to anyone and just simply load up that particular, so I could import my profile to the new computer. And that way, my Cubase on someone else's computer that has completely different key commands, preferences, would all just immediately work. So this way, multiple people could just kind of have everything customized, including, all of their different preferences, plugin folders, plugin presets, colors, all those different components would be just included directly within the profile manager, and you could just simply back that up, put it on, email it to yourself, or put it on a Dropbox or a USB drive, and anytime you go to anyone else's studio, just simply load up your profile, restart the program, and it'll be just like you have it. And then when you leave, the other user could load up their profile or a default profile and then kind of go directly to town. So the profile manager is a great addition to this. And we do like a lot of times where we have artists at NAMM shows doing different presentations, showcasing how they use Steinberg products. And we've done a lot with like Teddy Riley. And he always has his key commands and macros completely configured and really optimized for him. And when he touches my computer where I have my preferences, he's like, this isn't working the same way. So at this point, we're going to be able to just have each user have their own profiles, and they could just simply open it up and close and go to town exactly, and have all the settings, and very incredibly mobile, so you could transfer them easily to different computers. So a very easy way of kind of doing that. All right, so going through. Okay, so I'm just going through some of the other questions. All right. Okay, so we're seeing, is there a question just on, is there a video just on preferences? That's a good idea, so I'll try to get one together. We have the NAMM show coming up next week, so all chaos is kind of starting with the industry. But I'll see if I could do a video on preferences specifically. It's a great idea. Thanks for the suggestion. Okay, apparently someone is overdubbing dialogue on top of some of my tutorials. I guess they could do that. Let's go through some of our questions that were asked. Thanks for the kind words, Elite Beats. I'm glad it's helpful. All right. I think we had one question. Let me just kind of circle back a little bit. Just make sure I didn't miss. Okay. One question from Cubase experts is, let's say you snatch a groove off of a bunch of loops and you wanted to add it, and I add it into the quantize menu. Where can I find it in my system in case I have to restart my computer? So that would actually be directly in your, I believe that would be stored within your profile manager. If not, you can kind of go, and this is slightly different on Mac or PC, but if you go to, I generally kind of go to the wrong folder, but on, let me just see if I can find it real quick here. So if I go to under my library to application support, and on PC, you could just kind of go to the start menu, and then to Steinberg, and we'll take a look at but it's just kind of stored within the preference files. And for those that aren't familiar with this little trick, let's say if I have a loop here, and this is kind of a handy little feature. So if I come here and I have a drum loop, and I take my drum loop here, and let's say I do my hit points. So sometimes, people love drum loops because they do have kind of a certain groove and feel to them. So I could adjust kind of my sensitivity here. And then one of the functions that you have from the hit points tab is to actually create groove. So now when you create your groove, and if you go into under your editing, we could go to your quantize panel. You can now see that particular groove here. So, and if you wanted to, you could just save that as a preset, and that will just simply go directly there. So you could just simply store that as a preset, and you could migrate those files. I believe that's going to be carried over into Profile Manager, but I'm not absolutely sure. But that way you could use kind of the feel of a particular audio file directly to other MIDI data. So if someone, drummer just, you kind of want to quantize MIDI directly to and have the feel from the loop applied to different MIDI tracks. You could just simply extract that pretty easily. So, all right, let me go through some of the topics here. All right, so we had a question from Elite Beats. When you're in the mixer view, how can you add a high pass filter to multiple tracks at once? Can't remember how to do this anymore. Very time consuming doing it individually. We thought so too. So if I wanted to come here, and we can see kind of high pass and low pass filters. If we go into the pre section, they're kind of labeled a little differently than some people think. So you have a high cut, low cut filter. So, but you kind of get the idea. So if I select a number of different tracks here, so I'll select all these tracks, and then you could enable Quick Link right here in the mixer. And you could also do this by holding down Shift plus Alt. Will kind of turn that on. So if you hold down Shift plus Alt, we can now just say, okay, I want to turn on my high pass filter for all these particular channels, and now I could adjust the value directly here. So if I wanted to add more gain for all the selected channels, so select the channels. I know a lot of people, when they go to select a channel, inadvertently move the fader. So don't click on the fader, just in the meter area. And then if you hold down the Shift key, you can select all those channels. And if you hold down the Command key in the Mac, I think Control key on PC, you can deselect particular channels. So if you wanted to now set a quick link to all those, we can now link those selected channels and not the other channels. So that applies to if you want to do EQ, high pass, low pass filters, adding gain, adding plugins. So if I wanted to come here and add plugins directly to all those selected channels, I could just simply do that directly there across all those different tracks. So that's a really handy feature with a quick link. And it's one of those things that, once it became kind of a really fast part of workflow that was kind of really essential, and I couldn't go back without quick link. And that was kind of brought in by in Cubase 7 with new mixer design. So you're saying, it's is there another way to do this? I mean, you could link every channel, but quick link is going to be kind of the fastest way to do that. So, all right. So let me just cycle back through a couple questions. All right, just kind of cycling back. Okay, so and I see kind of a quick question. Just seeing a question if I don't have Machine on my computers. I'm sorry, I have it on my studio computer. but I don't have it on my kind of demo computers here. But if it's related to kind of setting up outputs or anything from earlier, just kind of leave a comment in the field. And I think once we kind of go here, and we had questions about backing up the grooves, and I think it's probably just going to be stored maybe within the preferences. Let me just see if I go here to so on a Mac, it's going to be under Library Preferences. But one of the things you can do is actually just kind of find there's a whole kind of knowledge base article on exactly where the different preference folders are for different things, but try within a profile manager, and that may actually have your groove presets as well. Okay. Okay. All right. So I'm just getting some comments on running machine inside of Cubase. So, it's going to be just shows up as a virtual instrument. So, just like other kind of, other plugins that have, such as, other drum programs like Groove Agent and stuff like that. So, I'm not sure what's really changed from doing in Cubase 8 with that, but I think it's going to be okay. But I think it's going to kind of function same way, and just kind of it's kind of you have your dedicated controller for the plugin as well, but you could have kind of all the timing. Okay, so I see Sir Robert's question. Good to see you, Robert, online. So using SPDIF out between a Mac and a PC, do I need to change settings in Cubase and Nuendo? So if you, if you wanted to just come here, once you go to your VST connections, like if you wanted to send audio directly from one device to another digitally, and if you have SPDIF connections, and these are generally kind of come in two formats, you could have one that looks like a Toslink cable, kind of like an ADAT light pipe connection, or sometimes referred to as an optical connection. And then you also have like a standard, like an RCA cable connection. So if you go to your VST connections here, you can now just kind of set your outputs, and then you could actually see kind of all of your available inputs and outputs here. So if you have my interface I have here, my UR44 doesn't have a SPDIF output, but you would often just kind of see it labeled as, SPDIF left, SPDIF right, and you could just simply pass your audio directly back and forth between Cubase and Nuendo from Mac to PC without having to worry about any conversion and sending it out of your digital to analog converter, and then back and capturing it back into your analog to digital converter. So, but it's really just kind of setting up. Now, one thing to be aware of when you do that is you want to make sure that the SPDIF connections are going to have a digital clock. So one of the devices you may want to designate as the master, and the other you may want to designate as kind of, it's often kind of a bad term, a slave to that. So basically one device is going to be kind of following the clock of the other device, and you can set one as the master and one as kind of to have the clocks synchronized so you don't have any clocking issues with that. So all right. All right, so we have someone from Senegal. That's great. I'm not sure if we had anyone from Senegal on before, so welcome. All right, so we had a quick quick question. Can you create a subgroup? Okay, so I'm just going to take this project here and I'm going to just revert it really quickly. And this will just kind of take it back to my last saved status. And let's say if I wanted to create a group for my drums, for instance. Okay, so if I wanted to, let's say, take all of my drums and send it to a subgroup. So what I could do is come here and say, okay, I want to, and one of the really handy things that was added is, let's say if I just come here, I want to start with my kick, and I'll go to all of my drums here. I'm going to hold down my shift key, and again, click kind of just to the right of the fader in that zone. That will select all of the tracks. And now what I could do is right click here, and we'll see the add we'll see add a group channel to selected channels. So and now one of the new things you could actually do is and we'll go over this, so I'll go over that a little later. So we'll say add track. And now what that's done is taking all these tracks and sent it to this particular group. Now, when I come here, let's say if I play back my project, I can now take all my drums down, and these are all being summed. So if I wanted to EQ my drums collectively as a single entity, I could come here. Or to run different plugins. So say I want to go to my channel strip. Let's say I want to add more attack. I could add my envelope shaper. Go ahead and increase the length. So this way all the drums are kind of treated as a single entity. So that's a really easy way. Now, some people also like to do parallel processing. This is kind of a technique done by a lot of mixing people, where they may want to like really compress one stream and also have one that has a little more dynamics. So if we come here, and one of the things that you have is this ability in the racks to have direct routing. So if I activate direct routing, what we're able to do, and if you kind of click here in this little icon, there's this little direct routing summing mode, and this is kind of a critical thing. So if I wanted to send it to this group and this group, I can now come here and I could send it to two different destinations. So right now it's going to my group one, and then I could activate it going to a secondary bus. So if I really wanted to totally kind of squash one, so now I can see that my drums are going to go to this group and to this group. So if I want to do like parallel processing, I can now open up this particular channel, and I'll just do kind of a like a real heavy compression on this. So if you want to do like parallel processing for drums, kind of sending it to two different destinations. Now, one of the things that you could also have is the ability to kind of do this with VCA. So if I have a number of existing tracks, let me just come here to a particular project where I have some VCA set up. So the traditional groups are going to sum the audio. So, and what that's going to allow you to do is you could actually kind of hear the particular, different sound sources. So now let's make sure I have kind of the right project here. So, but what a VCA is going to allow you to do, especially if you have like a number of existing tracks, I could take my VCA here. So I'm going to just select this and this, and we're going to add a VCA fader. And the VCA fader, when you actually kind of adjust it, won't actually kind of take into account, it won't sum the audio, but what it's going to allow you to do is to actually just kind of allow you to increase the volume levels without affecting or summing the audio, but you could do that and it won't affect stuff like your relationship of the channels going into their effect. So the group channel will sum, so you could do processing, and the VCA fader will just kind of control the audio level but not affect other aspects of the gain structure. Okay, so we're just going through some of the other questions. Okay, just reading through. Okay, so I see I have a problem with my MediaBay. Since I've updated my Cubase to 8.5, I'm losing my MediaBay settings every time I open a new session. So it could be, sometimes with MediaBay, once you have a new version, one of the things that's really helpful to do is you could kind of select like a number of different folders, let's say like kind of your user settings, and you can rescan the disk. And this will actually kind of build all of kind of the MediaBay references. So sometimes doing that, will kind of then save your MediaBay database. So if I come here, that will resave it. Now, sometimes if you go into your preference files, you could manually copy it over. For the most part, it does a really good job of being able to import your preferences on your Mac or your application data folder on Windows, so that when you're kind of working on it, that it will kind of extract those from previous versions. But sometimes I've seen some people where we needed to kind of manually just copy over like your MediaBay. I think it's a .db file. So sometimes if you have it working in 8 but it's not in 8.5, it may not have extracted that over. But you could try that, but you could also try to just manually rescan your folders and see if that works. So if you come over here to your file system, you could just say, okay, rescan, particular folders and see, so you could just say, you wanted to rescan this disk and have it, and then it should build your new MediaBay database for you. So let's see, we have some Groove Agent questions. Okay, so just seeing, okay, so just about some Groove Agent functions. Let me just kind of scroll up just a little bit and kind of catch these. So Groove Agent SE replaced Groove Agent 1. Okay, so when you say choking groups anymore in a new Groove Agent, maybe if you could state that a different way, what you want to accomplish. Is it just kind of muting different sources? So let me just kind of go through some of the, okay. All right, so just we're seeing a couple Groove Agent questions sneaking up here. So let's just let me just read through them. Appreciate your patience. Right, so I'm just kind of reading through a couple of questions here, make sure. Okay, patterns going for all 4 agents in Groove Agent 4. Every time I load a kit on new agent, new patterns always replace the already loaded patterns. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll load up Groove Agent 4, which I think we have here. So I'm just going to load up the full version of Groove Agent 4. So there's an SE that comes with Cubase, which is incredibly powerful. And then if you right click on the agent itself, you could load up a kit, or you could load up a kit with its associated patterns. So if you wanted to not affect the patterns of, let's say, not affect patterns from other kits, if you wanted to keep the patterns the same, you could just load the kit and that would load up the different sounds. So if you right click on the agent, you could just simply see that. So and I'm also seeing say you have a problem when you use a MIDI controller and not a Kai MPD18, which is kind of just like a drum. Pull up the kit. The sounds on certain pads are the same pads on the actual the sounds on certain pads or same pads on actual controller. Okay, so same pads are not. Okay, let's see if I understand this. So, and I haven't tried. Let's say, and there's going to be kind of 2 different agents. So I'll load up. First off, when I come here, I'm going to load up the full Groove Agent. And the full Groove Agent is going to have a lot more different kits, but one of the cool things is where the Groove Agent SE, we have one kind of agent, or kind of like one, you think of it, an agent as like a musician or a percussionist or whatever. But the full version actually has 4 different agents. So you could load up kits with or without patterns here, and you could choose. So if I wanted to come here, I could say, okay, I just wanted to load up my rock kit. I could have this. And so if I wanted to kind of start with a basic kit here, and let's say if I wanted to do more of a hip hop thing, so say if I just come here, and one of the cool things is, because like a lot of music is set up to be different, and you know, Groove Agent is sold separately, or you could get as part of the Absolute 2 collection. But let's say if I just wanted to go to just find one here, I think there's so say I have kind of a pop kit here, more of an R&B kit here, and now you could actually just kind of come directly to the mixer, and if you select the different agents here, you could actually at this point just say, okay, I want to take, so let's say I want this to be louder and bring this, and let's say I wanted to now load up something from our virtual percussionist, and this is like the greatest, to me this is like worth the whole price of Groove Agent just for the virtual percussionist. So if I come here, let's say I just want to add this in, so we could kind of control the levels of all these. Now when we do this, we could have different pattern pads, and these pattern pads you can actually switch all of the different patterns for each of the agents. And you could, if you wanted to, so if I click here on patterns and go to edit, you could actually kind of see an overview where you could have each of these agents here where they're not going to be set up. So when I switch, they're going to switch kind of all the different patterns for all the agents. And with the update to 4.2, let me just, and if you wanted to kind of see the keyboard kind of laid out so you can see different patterns, but with 4.2, you could also kind of have independent patterns here. So we could turn this function off here. So if I wanted to play back this pattern, I can now hit play. And then on each of the agents, I could say, okay, I want to take this pattern, play. And we'll say we'll take our hip hop. But if I wanted to change this pattern, where before they would all globally change to the same, I could say, you could each have these be independent. So when you could send one MIDI note to each of these, and each of the patterns can be kind of grouped together, or you could have them be completely independent. And that was one of the features found in the free update to 4.2. So that way, and then once again, here in each one, you could load the kit independently of the patterns. So that's kind of a big distinction that a lot of people can miss. And you could also load up different pattern groups. So if I wanted to kind of choke cymbals, I think we could do it. I don't know what the exact, let me just go to kind of the instrument. But I know I've done it with my electronic drum kit in my studio where, I've choked my crash cymbal. I'm not sure what the MIDI note is, but I could kind of read up. I could look up and find out what MIDI message it is that does choke cymbals. But I know you have the ability to do that. It may not be in the regular beat agent, but in the acoustic agent, I know you can do that. So see if that makes sense. So, but make sure that your patterns here, when you click on your pattern keys and you have this little function right here where these patterns will actually respond to different MIDI notes. And then when you have different MIDI notes, you may have some that overlap with some samples. So you could actually click here and then you could use a separate MIDI port for patterns. So you could have kind of a port B. So you could have an independent MIDI port for your different patterns as opposed to notes that are triggering from different samples. So I hope that makes sense. I know it's kind of a lot to go through. Let me just kind of go through some of the questions. So, and if you wanted to, always kind of switch the particular, patterns, you could always just kind of right click on the note and you could assign the trigger note or just actually edit and learn the trigger note for different controllers as well if it's not mapped out for how you want it to be. Okay. Right, so I'm just going through. All right, so you got a question. Say, what do the three boxes in the middle of the pads mean again? So here, if we go to the instrument, so you have mute, solo, the MIDI note, as well as kind of, I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question there. So So yeah, there is a 30-day demo available, so that's always good. So, and you see a question about VCA. So talking about VCA fader, is there a way to record enable only one track that is already linked with a VCA fader? So let's give that a quick try here. So let me just take a project and I'll add a VCA fader. So I'll just do this from my mixer. Okay, so we see our VCA track here. All right, let me activate this project. Okay, so let's add our VCA fader here to these tracks. So if you select it directly from the project window for recording, then it won't be linked if they're in the VCA fader. But once you kind of had the VCA fader selected, I think their link will be going. But if we come from the main project window, at that point we could have independent control. So if I come here to my kick or to my snare, I guess it looks like it's linked here as well. So let me just see if there's a way to. So if you hold down Alt or Option, you could just simply override the grouping for record enable when it's in a VCA fader. So give that a try. Just try it on the Mac. Now we have a question when in reference to the Groove Agent before. So if I come here to my VST instruments, we go directly to our Groove Agent. All right, so this is the question when seeing the pads and dragging samples on. And this is one of the coolest things with Groove Agent is you could literally just kind of take a number of tracks. So let's say if I have like, 2 different kick tracks here, I could just take these. I'm just going to turn my snap off. And I'll say, okay, I want these 2 kick drums here. And you could drag them onto a pad. So you have 1 that will drag it onto a pad. 2 will replace. And I think, let me just, so 1, when you see 1, it's going to drag it onto a pad. See, 2 is replace, and I think 3 might be to layer the pads. Let me just try that out just to make sure. So 1 is copying it onto a new pad. 2, I believe, is replacing it, and 3 is adding onto the existing pad. So 1 replaces 2 copies. 1 drags it to the pad, 2 replaces, 3 adds it. I believe that's what it sets up. So. All right, so let's see, for going through some of the questions. Okay, on Beat Agent, when you select a pad and are in the Edit tab, is there a way to select exclusive group for the pad so they will not play at the same time? I don't recall exactly where it is. So, I know that there's some, I believe there's some method for doing that within the Groove agent as well. Let me just, I may have to look that one up just to make sure. So if you remind me for next time. All right, so let me just go through. And I think sometimes if we, with the kind of exclusive pads, let me just try this here. I think if you come here, you might. I think you might be able to set it in the MIDI editors. I'll see if we have time, I can circle back to that. So. Okay. Okay. So we have a question on. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Dennis. All right. Okay, the edit tab. All right, so so we had a quick question on logical editor. Can we explain some functions with that? So let me just add a MIDI track with some MIDI data in it here. And we're just drawing some controllers here. And turn my snap off so they could be prettier lines here. All right. All right, so the logical editor kind of sometimes can be a little intimidating for people to get into, but it's a very powerful editor, and it's a kind of a conditional editor. So let me just go through. So as we're doing this, we can kind of, and one of the best ways to learn it is to actually kind of just play around a little bit with kind of some of the different presets. So what it's going to allow you to do is to kind of define so let's say here if I have a bunch of notes, and let's say I wanted to delete every note of B2 and lower. So we could actually kind of choose the function that you want to do. And then you could say, okay, I wanted to delete, and then we want to say, we want to choose our, and you have kind of different MIDI messages. And within MIDI messages, you have different parameters. So like parameter 1 on a MIDI note is the pitch, parameter 2 is down velocity, parameter 3 is release velocity. So I could say I wanted to delete notes that were lower than C1. I'm just going to type in C1. You could also just play it in. So at this point, I could, if I've done this correctly, I could kind of select this event here. And at that point, you could actually kind of just choose different types of controllers. So let's say if I wanted to And let's say if I have my velocity here of a bunch of notes. One of the things that I did was I actually, when I first got into the logical editor, and I find that people get into it when they have a whole bunch of problems. Like one of the problems I ran into maybe, 23 years ago, I did an album, and it was kind of a low budget record, but we wanted to have great results, and we actually used kind of an electronic drum kit with real cymbals. And the problem was that anytime that the drummer went to the ride cymbal, that it sent a false trigger kind of on a tom-tom pad below it of a very low velocity, like 30 to 40 for the velocity. But every time, and we didn't necessarily hear it when we're tracking, but then when you start, in the mixing process, you start having all these weird low toms coming out of nowhere. So we actually said, okay, I wanted to take, every note that had, let's say, a value lower than 40. So we're going to say a value 2, which would be our velocity, and that was less or equal to this value. So instead of spending hours kind of doing it, you can set up different conditions. Or if you, like a lot of times in the old days, we would have people that had like Roland D50 keyboards, and they were like really great at spitting out an inordinate amount of aftertouch information that would kind of clog the MIDI data stream if people hold down chords and they kind of press down inadvertently. So you could actually just say, delete standard MIDI file events, delete all delete all events. So if I wanted to come here, I could say, okay, I want to delete events that are equal to controller, and then click here on this particular line, and the controller value we want to say is equal to so at that point, you could just say, I want to delete all aftertouch information. So it allows you to set up different MIDI conditions. But if you kind of start off and really, a lot of people, when they want to learn it, kind of start with the logical editor presets. And then at this point, you could just, if you wanted to automatically, delete short notes below a particular threshold. So we could do that. So if you just kind of go to your logical editor and then go to your presets, you can often kind of just play, okay, delete velocity below 40. And this way you say, I wanted to delete notes, events that are equal to note that have a velocity less than 40. So you can kind of choose different conditions and be able to edit directly those values. All right, let's go through. So can we see one of your presets for your mastering chain of plugins? That's a secret. But a lot of times I use a multi-band compressor. I do my mastering in Wavelab, and I have kind of a pretty good idea of different plugins to use within Wavelab, like the multi-band compressor. And I use a lot of the envelope shaper, which is kind of a bit atypical for mastering. And usually some kind of spatial enhancement to make it sound a little bit wider. But people have different mastering chain presets. I was doing an interview with Teddy Riley, and he's like, "That's my secret." So it's kind of, everyone has little tricks that they do. Now, when trying to make MIDI drums, I see a question about how to kind of humanize velocity. So if we come here on a MIDI track, you'll have a function under MIDI modifiers, and here you could just choose to kind of randomize, between different values, position, pitch, velocity, and these will actually just kind of apply the values in real time, so you can actually just kind of adjust your velocity. Now, if you want to kind of humanize feel, like if it's very straight and you want a little more swing, one of the cool things you could do is go to your MIDI inserts and open up a quantizer plugin, and you have like a great swing feel here. And one of the cool things is this will actually just kind of take your existing track and process it in real time to apply the new value here, so that as you're working, it's not actually affecting the original data until you go to your MIDI and then you choose to freeze MIDI modifiers. But you could actually just kind of take like a very straight track and adjust kind of the different feels and add more swing to kind of get, you know, very popular R&B feels to tracks right there. All right, so so let's kind of go back. See. All right, so we kind of started off saying that we would show some stuff from Cubase 8.5. So let me just go through some of the new things that were implemented in 8.5. So, you know, one of the things that we want to do is to kind of, as we do like a 0.5 version, we wanted to kind of have a significant amount of workflow enhancements. And we've seen some of these functions kind of sporadically throughout, like the profile manager. But let's say if I come over here and I have a number, let's say 8 audio tracks. When adding audio tracks, one of the things that we could do now is, or when adding audio tracks, we have the ability to actually choose our different outputs. So if we have multiple outputs defined in our VST connections, so if I come here to my VST connections and let's say I wanted to add a number of stereo buses, it used to be that you would add your track and then you would have to, as you would add a track, then go to the routing in that particular channel, but now you could actually choose your different stereo bus here. Now, a lot of tracks would automatically be placed at the bottom of a particular project, which could be problematic if you had a large template. Like if you had, 1,800 tracks and you add a group channel, it's always at the bottom. So when we go to add like a group channel here, we have new options. So one of them would be to create it inside the folder, and that would add it kind of at the bottom within a folder for all of our group tracks like previous versions. But if I wanted to add a track directly here, like a VCA, we also have the option to choose inside the folder. So if I say outside the folder rather, this would place it directly below the selected track. So at that point I could add that VCA fader directly anywhere that I want. Or if I wanted to add a group channel right there, I could just add my group channel and we will choose to create it outside of the folder, and the group channel again gets placed directly below the selected track and not always at the bottom. We would see a lot of functions kind of in the setup window where you could just simply turn on and off different aspects of the program, and we see the setup window in the mix console as well. But now if I wanted to come here, we could also just kind of hover directly at the top, and then we could see all of the different functions directly there. Now we could also add multiple effects channels. So if I wanted to just simply say, okay, I need to work with these effects channels, I could say, okay, let's add 4 different effects channel tracks, and again I could create them inside or outside the folder and add multiple effects channels simultaneously. And then if you want, you could just add your inserts so that they'll all be kind of set up exactly as you want. Now, working with our VST, our MediaBay, for all of your Steinberg instruments, we wanted to make it a bit easier so we could actually see kind of all of your different instruments here. So if you wanted to go to Retrolog too, you could actually just kind of come right over here and say, okay, I want to see kind of all of my Retrolog. So Retrolog has been updated pretty significantly. So if I just wanted to I could just drag and create my instrument track directly with Retrolog. And then if I wanted to open it up, some of the new things that you see in Retrolog are going to be the addition of a third oscillator. Excuse me. And we could also go and have kind of built-in arpeggiators. So if you wanted to have full arpeggiators going on, and you could have, all sorts of different arpeggiators at different tempos, and also a lot more flexibility with effects. So if you want to have kind of a resonator, we can think of that as kind of like a 3-pole filter. You could have phasers or modulation. So you can have kind of all these different effects that are included, as well as reverb, delays, and of course all tempo sync. So a lot of really phenomenal sounds and flexibility here that you don't get in a lot of virtual analog instruments. And there's people already doing some phenomenal presets for this that they're just sharing with kind of the Steinberg community. So a really phenomenal instrument. Now, when we wanted to just easily find different things, we could see all of our Steinberg instruments here. Okay, and then when I come here, we could see, but if I wanted to see other, like a lot of times we have tons of different drum loops that come with Cubase. Or if I wanted to see, my effects change, my VST effects. So you have all these icons, and they could be a bit cryptic for people, like, is this a VST effects preset or an effects chain preset? So now you could just kind of very easily navigate between those and differentiate very quickly with that. So if I wanted to jump and have loops, now a lot of times when we had different drum loops, if I really like that, I could drag it to an existing track, or I could drag it to the bottom. But if I wanted this drum loop to be in the middle, I can now just drag it directly over here, and we see where this little green line is, and you can now just place it directly and have the track automatically created here. So really, really nice new things. Now going into our mix console, we've also added this capability of having our different functions here. So if I go to my edge, if I'm across a different monitor, I can now just simply come here and activate, deactivate the control room, or if I wanted to take a look at my control room functionality or my, so all these different settings here. Now, one of the things that people had complained about was when they went to an insert, that the hovering characteristic. So if I wanted to have a plug-in here, now when I go over it, we could clearly kind of bypass the insert. If I wanted to look at it or select a different insert, we could do that. But we could also right click and say, okay, I want to see the plugin names and inserts. So now when I open it up, it's a little taller, but everything is shown and it's not overlapping. Like the power button isn't overlapping with other plugins. So kind of makes it very easy and to delineate between different tracks. Now, as we work on this, one of the things we also want to do is to have some more MIDI editing capability. So if I go to this project, I'll just activate. So now when I wanted to go to a key editor, one of the things that we could do is actually just, instead of having to switch between like a drawing tool and a tool to edit velocities and switching between my object selection and a drawing tool, one of the things that we're able to do is actually just using the object selection tool. I could just say, okay, I want to take just this note right here, and I could just kind of draw in the note that easily. Now, as I do this, I could also say I wanted to adjust the velocity. So before releasing the mouse button, I could just move up and down to adjust the velocity. If I hold down my Alt key, I can select my pitch. If I wanted to adjust my length, or if I just hold down Control, I could adjust my length. If I wanted to not snap, I could hold down the Shift key, and now I could just have that automatically snap directly to different events. So very easy to just double click and add notes in without having to switch tools. Now there's some makeovers going into the MIDI drum editor, which is kind of some pretty significant changes here. Now one of the cool things of the MIDI drum editor has always been the capability of having kind of the diamond indicating exactly when the note starts, which is very critical for a lot of different functions. So, but if you're working with drum loops on your pad, you may want to see the length. So you could select the note and kind of see the length here. But now we give you a mode where you could actually just see the length. So you could toggle between kind of the diamond view as well as kind of the traditional piano roll. So we could just kind of see the lengths of notes kind of more graphically laid out. Just like we did in our MIDI key editor, we could just double click and now you could just add notes in just by using the object selection tool. If you don't like the note, you can erase it just by double clicking on the actual note itself. Now, as you're working with this, one of the things that's really handy is, and we've seen this before with some of our different view options, is you could actually say, I want to see all the drum sounds in my drum map, or you could say I want to show drum sounds in use by the instrument and hide everything else, or you could say show drum sounds that only have events, and you could filter out the view of everything from that particular event right there. So that way you could see only the drum sounds that you actually need to see. And if you wanted to reverse the order of that, you could do that as well, or kind of see all of your different drum sounds laid out for you. So very handy MIDI functionality that's been augmented. So there's some changes to the chord track as well. So one of the things that we can add is sections. So when I wanted to come here, we could say, okay, I want to look at playing chords, or I wanted to look at sections. So what sections will allow me to do is, let's say if I have a chord laid out here, so let's just make sure that at this point we could use these keys. So I'm just gonna see if we have this loaded up. Let me just play this real quick. So you could actually use these keys to kind of play the different parts of the chord. So instead of having to actually, if you have like really poor keyboard skills, I could hit one note. Say if I wanted to hit my MIDI note here to trigger my D scale, I can hit these pitches. So I could just easily arpeggiate by hitting these 4 notes regardless, and it'll automatically kind of map to the correct chord. And I could use that kind of as my new MIDI controller if you wanted to. So this way you could actually kind of, you know, even if you can't quite play the chords because keyboard isn't your primary instrument, you could just hit these 4 notes. And then just, again, and be able to kind of have control over that. So that gets to be really handy with that. Now, one of the things we also have done is we kind of done a lot of work working with, let me just open up one project here real quick, is with the transport. So if we wanted to go directly to our transport, so I'm just going to open up this, is we've always seen kind of the left and right locators directly kind of mapped to our punch in and punch out points, which is handy. But sometimes you may want to have kind of the punch in, punch out to be independent. So let's say if I was playing back a particular project here. So one of the things you may notice is immediately that the actual just resetting one of my computer parts here, is we'll actually see kind of our when we look at this, we could say, okay, I wanted to turn on and off my cycle. We could do that directly by clicking on the cycle range itself. Now, when we get into doing stuff with, let's say, our transport, we wanted to have the ability to have kind of independent punch-ins and punch-outs directly from this. So if I wanted to set a punch-in there, we can now go to your transport. And now one of the things is all of the different recording modes have all been kind of really clearly organized here. So as we wanted to work with this, we could just say, okay, I wanted to, and we have this function called punch points. So I can say, let's set punch points to our screen resolution, so to our selection range. So now I could have this cycle, and as soon as it goes to that point, it'll punch in. And punch out. And then at that point, so your punch in and punch out points can be completely independent of the actual files that you have. Now, we also wanted to do some really handy work with tempo editing. Sorry, I'm going to reboot my one computer here that's has all the comments on it. So just give me a second. So if we wanted to kind of take a project here that had a number of different tempo changes. So if I wanted to come here, and if I turn on my tempo, we can see that kind of the tempo isn't really lined up with our particular project. So what we're able to do now is I'm going to select this, and we could do this since earlier versions, is to say, okay, I wanted to go to tempo detection, and we'll analyze. And now when we listen to it, so now we have kind of our different tempo change. And what I want to do now is I'm going to select, move our time signature track up. And then we're going to move our tempo track up. Then I'm going to actually just kind of define the downbeat, which we'll say is right coming up here. So now what I could do is actually just kind of take the existing tracks here. And if I wanted to actually take the different values here, I can say we want to assign all the tempo changes as metadata. I can now go to my tempo track and I'll go to advanced under audio. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say set definition from tempo. All right, and then once we see this little audio here, we're going to see a little icon. We're going to have kind of all the different tempo changes as metadata applied to the files. So if I wanted to take my tempo off here, one of the things we could do is have kind of new tempo handling and editing capabilities. So I'll come here and I could just take a selection of the audio. And if I wanted to speed up the selection but keep kind of the curve, I'm able just to kind of do this with new tempo editing. Or if I wanted to take that tempo and just kind of regulate it a little more, have it more straight or a little more laid out. So as I do this, I could actually just kind of have the tempo change in real time. Or if I want to slow down the whole tempo. It's a pretty extreme amount. Or if I wanted to do a retard. So kind of very powerful tempo handling. Now, if we're starting a new project, and this is kind of one of my pet peeves for many years, and let's say I was doing my whole project and I started it at 108 beats a minute, and I have all sorts of great MIDI parts all going on, and I wanted to say I have all my MIDI parts, everything is perfect, and now I needed to do a tempo change. When activating the tempo map, it would actually immediately jump to 120 beats a minute, but now it'll automatically keep kind of the same tempo value, so you don't have any big jumps. So it'll actually maintain the actual tempo value there. Now, we saw before that we could not only take our different files here, and we have our profile manager, so allowing you to import and export kind of all of your settings, but we can now import and export video tracks from other projects. So if I just say, okay, I want to take a different project here and import all these different tracks, I could just say, let's take this project, and I could say, okay, I just wanted to import all those tracks directly into this project. So at that point, you could just have easily kind of work on projects in sections. Now, one of the things that's very powerful is this concept of VST transit. So what this is going to allow you to do is you could actually just kind of log on, and if you wanted to, and one of the cool things about this part of the program is you could actually have it could actually kind of download the latest versions for you. But if you wanted to work collaboratively with someone, you have the ability, you could just kind of log on. Let me just see if I remember my password here. And what you have the ability to do is to actually kind of search out other users. You could take your projects. You could have a user profile. You could say, this is, I play bass, I play guitar, here's my projects. I could search for friends who I want to collaborate with. And then you could actually at that point, so say if I'm looking for a friend named Matt, I could just kind of come here, search, and say, okay, I need someone, my friend Matt, to add tracks, or I need his editing expertise on a particular project. Like, let's say, oh, I don't have a theremin. At this point, I could actually invite Matt to my project, and he could download my different projects. And at this point, I also have the ability to just say, okay, I want to take this, and let's say he uploaded all the changes. I can now open the project directly from the cloud and open up my project and be able to collaborate and have different people running Cubase simultaneously, just to the point where everything would automatically just kind of download your different projects as you see expected here. So let's get this restarted here real quick. So there's a lot of great new things inside of, let me just share my screen. You can see that. So a lot of like really exciting new things found directly in 8.5. Let me just get this sorted out here real quick. Accidentally closed the program. So at that point, a lot of really great workflow enhancements to kind of make everything a little faster. So let's say, and I see a question on if your audio actually responds to the chord track. So if I come here, yeah, it will. It's going to do it for monophonic audio. So something like a vocal. It's not really going to do it for like drum parts or piano, stuff like that. So it's going to take a monophonic file. And then at that point, you could, as we have different chord tracks here, let me just go to my chord track. And I'm going to create chord symbols based on my MIDI notes here. And then when you go into, and this will be done through the very audio editor, you're going to need to actually do the pitch and warp, so it has its analysis. And then as soon as you would change a chord here, so let's say if I want to change the second chord to an E, I could go to my chord track here and just have it follow the chord track. And as I've done that, you could kind of see that the notes will change as let me see if I just come to my first note here and change that to an A chord. And then if we go to our window, you could see this kind of reflected directly there with the different changes. So when I undo or redo, so your monophonic audio can follow the chord charts. So so a lot of great new functionality. Let me just kind of cycle back, see we had other questions kind of coming in. So you see a question of when was 8.5 released? It was like the first week of December. So we don't know when Cubase 9 is released. Obviously, 8.5 is just kind of come out. Steinberg planning on ever working with Native Instruments? Yeah, we work with them all the time. So obviously, they've been very successful making VST instruments. So let's see other questions. So I see a question, has anybody tried rewiring with Reason? There's a big problem. I haven't really worked with Reason in a long time. So, I know a lot of people had problems initially with 64-bit versions of Reason, so make sure you have that. Okay, so with VST Connect, one of the cool things of this is, and this is now kind of migrated to the cloud area. So if we go to your VST Connect, at this point, you could just say you want to create a VST Connect. And what happens is the other person downloads the VST Connect Performer software free. You'd see them kind of on a webcam. You could, as soon as you have an internet connection, you can type in your name. It gives you a code. You give that code to the other person, and then you could record them directly into your timeline, as if they were kind of like in your studio. So basically, they're able to You know, if they have an iPad, it's a $5 app. Or if they have Mac or PC, it's a free download. And they could be recording directly into your Cubase project. So you could basically play your project. They hear it in their headphones through their audio interface. They record it, it's then recorded directly back into your system, and all the latency is compensated for on both sides. So it's a pretty amazing technology. We have a lot of people doing records this way, and it's a very kind of exciting way to collaborate. So if you want to do kind of real-time collaboration, where you and the cool thing is you could actually see them on a webcam, so you can say, oh, I like this track, or can you change this? And you can have kind of a real-time interaction with them. And if you want to have more collaborative, kind of offline process, you have the VST Transit. So you have kind of two choices to work with there. So let me just kind of circle back, see if we have, if I missed any questions. If you have questions that you had missed earlier, or anything that's like, that I didn't catch, please feel free to kind of reiterate it. Just kind of cycling back. Hope everyone has learned a couple new things. Making sure I didn't miss. All right. See people thanking me for doing the videos, so we're always happy to help, and I just hope people find it useful. So, okay, so we'll touch a little bit on MIDI inserts. All right, so let's take a look at some MIDI inserts and some of the capabilities that you could do. Okay, let me just jump back to another project here. So, all right, we'll touch a little more on some of the MIDI inserts. It's kind of a cool part of the program that's pretty underutilized. So let's say if I wanted to, just say we'll just kind of play this just a little bit here. So let's say I'll just open up my, just hit play here and just see. Let me see. Okay, so I'll just switch this over so we can hear it. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's say if I wanted to just play like some different chords, let's say on a clavinet here. All right, so the MIDI inserts were kind of like real-time MIDI plugins. So, and there's some like really cool ones that you can do. So you have MIDI inserts and MIDI sends. So a MIDI insert will actually be on a particular track. So if I wanted to have like different arpeggios, you know, you could have, you know, so if I come here, we could say, so now if I just kind of play a chord. And then we could kind of change the different parameters. So say I want it to be So I think. So this is just taking what I'm playing a chord and actually just basically running it through an arpeggiator in real time. So let's say if I just wanted to take an actual part here. Now, one of the cool things is I could just kind of play my different arpeggiators here. And you could also have different MIDI effects. So if you wanted to even, have different MIDI echoes, so you can say. So say if I want this to be like a eighth note delay, so I could hit one note. And one of the cool things they could do with different arpeggios is you have a record function here. So if I wanted to just literally just kind of take the arpeggio here, you could place it into record. And even though I'm just going to play one chord and just kind of hold that chord, I can now just kind of and it'll actually just kind of record a different arpeggiation. So, and if you wanted to do, and so there's a lot of really great stuff. So if you wanted to compress velocities, if you wanted, MIDI density or remap MIDI controllers, so you can say, okay, controller 17 is now remapping to modulation, MIDI echo, different MIDI modifiers. So if you wanted to just kind of come over here and say, okay, I wanted to take my position and be able to modify the position of timing or pitch or velocity. So as you play incoming MIDI data, we could do that. Now, if I have, let's say, another instrument here. So let's say if I open up something like from Retrolog 2. Just kind of or say I'll do something from just find another instrument here real quick. So at this point I could actually just say, okay, I wanted to take my MIDI send. So if I have an arpeggiator here, I could actually kind of take the so say we go to our arpeggiator, and then I could actually, as a MIDI send, I could now just say, okay, I want the arpeggiator to, from this track, to be going directly to Groove Agent or to another device. So I could take one track, take the MIDI part of that, and trigger arpeggios. So I could take like a bass line and trigger arpeggios to another track and record that in real time. So there's a lot of great stuff you could do with the kind of the MIDI insert effects. So just kind of play around with it a little bit. So at that point, just kind of, have fun and kind of play around with it a bit. And I think it'll, you discover kind of a whole world of kind of performance possibilities. So, all right, let me see if there's any other questions. Sorry if the balance isn't good between two, so I can only kind of judge from my headphones. So let's see if there's any other quick questions. Yeah, so the batch export, the question is the batch export in Cubase Artist? So it's going to be in the full version of Cubase Pro. So definitely kind of worth the upgrade for that. So. right, so I see a question, can I create a logical editor program script? Outside of Cubase, then import it back into Cubase. I don't know a way to do it outside of Cubase. And the programming, I don't think you really kind of access it at a kind of a development level for programming language. It's just kind of a Boolean kind of architecture within within Cubase. Now there's also so we have kind of the logical editor that we often use for MIDI stuff, but we could also come over here and there's a project logical editor, not that, but if you want to go to the edit, there's also kind of a logical editor for the program too. So these are all kind of done using kind of the built-in tools, and it's kind of programmed that way, so you don't have to be a software developer to do it. But I think once you kind of play around with it, you could see a lot of flexibility there. Okay, we'll see. All right, so we'll see if there's any kind of last-minute questions that are coming up. If not, we'll wrap up. I'd like to thank everyone for watching. I hope everyone's learned a trick or two. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, this is a good way to kind of get notified, and you could kind of watch other kind of Google Hangouts. Okay, so we're seeing a couple other questions coming in. How do I save my MIDI loops and audio loops with all the plugins and everything? So a lot of times what you could actually do is, like, let's say if I wanted this as a MIDI loop, so I believe it has to be going out to a instrument track. So let's say if I come here, and let's say if I just wanted to copy this here, and then when I go to export, often you will see the option to export as a MIDI loop. So that would do that. But you could also, for audio stuff, you could save it as, if you wanted to save it as a track preset, you could do that as well. So, but you also have the ability, so there's a number of different ways, you could export selected tracks. So this way you can say, okay, I just want to take these particular audio files, and there's also something, so when you do export selected tracks, you could just have that as like an XML file. Let me just find a different project that's a little easier to see, say with some different audio here. So if you want to take a number of different tracks, you could export these as selected tracks. So if you wanted to do that, you could copy the actual files or just reference, and then you could import those into other projects, and you could export MIDI loops as well. So, there's a number of different ways of doing that. So see some more comments coming in. And if you wanted to, you could, and once you kind of export the track settings, at that point, once you have the track selected and you choose to export tracks, that would once you do the export selected tracks, that would carry over different processing and stuff. Let's see. Okay. So again, a question from Dave about, can you create a logical editor program scripting outside of Cubase and import it back into Cubase? I don't know of a way to do that. So I could, when I come here, I think Elite Beats is asking. So I'm kind of at my control room level here. It's also going into a mixer. So next time I'll try to turn it up a little bit on the MIDI side. And if you want, like Cubase experts, or if anyone else wants to email me directly, you could email me at gondo, like GONDO at yamaha.com if you have questions or want to get in touch with me afterwards. Please feel free to reach out, or you could send questions to the channel as well. So let me see if there's any other things that I missed. If not, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Hope everyone has gotten something out of it and learned a couple new tricks and got to see some of the new 8.5 stuff. All right, so I'll go ahead and wrap up here in just a second. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for checking out. So if you want to see my stereo bus of this project, I'm happy to kind of So here I just have a vintage open deck. So I don't really have anything on my stereo bus. If I bypass it. So no great secrets, Elite Beats. So my email address, I'll go ahead and just kind of enter it in, but gondo at yamaha.com, not Yahoo, but Yamaha, YAMAHA. So, but I'll enter it in the comments field here if you guys want to jot it down. Make sure I spelled it right in the email. All right. All right, so a quick question here at the end from Elite Beats. Is it better to use clip gain to adjust to individual tracks? It really depends. Some people prefer to do a lot of work with clip gain. Yeah, so some people use clip gain a lot for kind of regulating volume levels. So sometimes, people find themselves compressing to kind of even things out and then compressing again at a secondary level for kind of, for a compressed sounding effect on a vocal especially. But some people do kind of a lot of the evening out with clip gain. And you could adjust a clip gain before it hits the channel. So some people have a big workflow of using the clip gain before it hits the channel so that it's making, and they could just kind of use one stage of compression afterwards. So, but, people have obviously are successful with many different tactics. But one of my friends is nominated for a couple Grammys for engineering this year. That's a common tactic that he uses. He'll just kind of go through and take out breaths and stuff with clip gain and then kind of regulate it a bit. I like using clip gain a lot, especially breaths and attacks and stuff like that, so I don't have to use like a specialty compressor for that. All right, so it's great, Robert, your Nuendo being at Guitar Center. Glad to hear that. So if you want to adjust the clip gain, there's a couple ways of doing it. Just make it a little more obvious here in the screen. So if you just kind of adjust here, you can adjust kind of your clip gain here. And I do it a lot. Like I'll show you an example of where I kind of cleaned up a vocal a lot, and like that a lot of people kind of liked. And this was perhaps kind of tracked and recorded with a lot of compression, so like the breaths became very prominent but I'll show you a little editing I did on a particular vocal here on this project. So what I did with kind of clip gain here is you can see kind of a lot of different breaths. And, you know, you could also adjust kind of globally. So I just kind of cut and we'll do clip gain. But some people will also just say, okay, like, you know, I want this word to be a little louder, or I want it to get softer there. So if you grabbed a pencil tool, you could do that directly on, in addition to kind of the global clip gain here. So if you wanted to kind of raise everything but still have a curve before you hit the mixer channel, so that's another great way to do. So you could do that as well. So all right, so let's see if there's any other quick comments. If not, we'll wrap up so I can sneak home and see my son before he goes to sleep. Let's see. All right, so again, thank you for everyone. I hope everyone's learned some tips and tricks. And if you have comments or topics that you want to see covered in the next Hangout, we'll do it sometime in February. You know, we'll be happy to do that. So, you know, question real quick before we wrap up is, you know, would you suggest mixing with clip gain and leaving the faders alone? I think kind of a combination of both is a good solution. So, you know, you kind of use the faders for fade ins and stuff like that, and clip gains for other, you know, for kind of more corrective before, you know, corrective stuff to, you know, where you're not having to do all sorts, you know, some things I think are quicker with clip gain than with kind of automation on a fader. So, all right. So with that, we'll wrap up. Thank you everyone so much for hanging out and participating. It's great to see people from different parts of the world joining us. I know it's very late in a lot of those places, like in England and Germany and Brazil, and Senegal. I think this is the first time we had someone live from Senegal. So it's you know, it's really a real pleasure for me to see people kind of joining in from around the world for this. So thanks again, and we'll see you next month. And hope everyone has a great time playing with your Cubase 8.5 and your Nuendo, Sir Robert. So I think you'll have a lot of fun with that. So thank you, and we'll go ahead and wrap up. Have a great night. Good night.